Hi guys, one of the things I believe is that everyone has a story, and I believe that no matter who you are, your story is powerful and it's worth listening to. One of the main reasons why I believe your story is powerful is because it tells you who you are. And of course, we're dynamic, we're always changing, we grow and mature, but our stories are an integral part of the shaping process, of the forming process, causing us to be who we are becoming. That's the power of stories. But it's not just your story or my story shaping who we are. There's bigger stories as well, meta stories. And there are these bigger stories of culture, meta stories of culture or government, your workplace, your family. Marketing companies, of course, want to tell your story, hoping to shape your purchasing decisions. And some of these bigger stories, other stories, external stories, are helpful, others less so. I think personally that of all these external bigger stories, I think that God has a story. And I think that God's story tells us who we're meant to be. And it might surprise you. I believe that inside the story of God is the story of us as in humans. Inside the story of God is the story of us, and it reveals facets of our identity. We're not just like one-dimensional as human beings. We're multi-dimensional. And one of the facets of our identity, I believe, as revealed in the story of God, showing the story of us as humans, is the facet of our prophetic identity. I believe that as human beings, we all have a prophetic identity. Maybe it's well developed, maybe it's completely undeveloped. But I believe that we have a prophetic identity as human beings, which flows from the heart of God to expose exploitation and to identify a better way of being human and to bring comfort to the downtrodden, to the exploited. And sometimes this prophetic identity, it expresses itself as the desire to confront injustice. And sometimes when we act in that, it leads to good outcomes. And sometimes when we confront injustice, it kind of just leads to actions that kind of squash down injustice in one place, only for it to pop up in another place. And today, we're going to be looking at, once again, the story of Moses, who is the archetypal prophet of the Hebrew Bible, the number one prophet, so to speak, of the Hebrew Bible. And looking at the story of Moses and in his interaction with God, and how Moses becomes more and more prophetic, I think it shows us the story of God through the story of Moses, shows the story of us and our prophetic identity. So, Moses had an encounter with God, and he came to terms more fully with God's heart and God's character. This is, Moses meets with God and receives the 10 Commandments. And these 10 Commandments, we think of them maybe from the distance between 3,500 years from that time. We think of the commandments as laws, as do this, don't do that. And there's an element where that's true, but actually the 10 Commandments, when Moses received them, encountering God, he was encountering God's heart, God's intentions for the people of God, the Israelites, to flourish and to live lives free. Remember, they were set free from slavery, and the 10 Commandments were a framework and a way to see the world that would stop them from being exploited and also stop them from exploiting others. And today we're going to dive a little bit more deeply into what God reveals about himself to Moses, because I believe that the more we look at the story of God, revealing who God is to us, it reveals the story of us. And like I said, the story of us reveals who we can be in our prophetic identity as we partner with this prophetic God. So I'm going to read to you from Exodus chapter 33 and then 34. 33 verse 18. Then Moses said, "Now show me your glory." And the Lord said, "I will cause all my goodness to pass in front of you, and I will proclaim my name, the Lord, in your presence. I will have mercy on whom I will have mercy, and I will have compassion on whom I will have compassion." Verse 34, the next chapter 34, verse 5. Then the Lord came down in the cloud and stood there with him and proclaimed his name, the Lord. And he passed in front of Moses, proclaiming, the Lord, the compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness, maintaining love to thousands, and forgiving wickedness, rebellion, and sin. Yet he does not leave the guilty unpunished. He punishes the children and their children for the sin of the parents to the third and fourth generation. Okay, So just to give a little bit of context here about these verses in these two different chapters, 33 and 34, Moses has led the people of God, Israel, out of slavery in Egypt into freedom so that they can worship God. And now they are at this place. They're journeying from Egypt to where they're going to settle. And now they're at this place called Mount Sinai. And Moses has gone up Mount Sinai to receive God's 10 commandments. Once again, not just laws of do this, don't do that. They're principles. These 10 commandments, they're principles for God's people to live by that will cause them to flourish by not being exploited and not exploiting others. And while Moses is up there having this encounter with God on the mountain, down the mountain where the multitudes of Israel are, the people of Israel, they're growing impatient. And it's been 40 days and 40 nights. And actually they rebel against God and they make a golden calf and they worship it. Remember, the first commandment is you shall have no other gods before me. And they worship another god. And another commandment says you shall not have idols, and they worship an idol. And so that's the context here. While Moses is encountering God, the people of God, Israel, down the mountain, they're rebelling against God. They're worshipping a God that they've made with their own hands. So once again, Exodus 34 verse 6 says this, and he, God, passed in front of Moses, proclaiming, the Lord, the compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness, maintaining love to thousands and forgiving wickedness, rebellion and sin. Yet he does not leave the guilty unpunished. So the words translated here, the Lord, maybe if you have a paper Bible or an online Bible in front of you, it has the Lord, the word Lord, in all caps. And whenever that happens, it's telling you that it's a deliberate mistranslation. Actually, the words in Hebrew are Yahweh. When Lord is written in all caps like that, it's actually Yahweh. And so it should be reading Yahweh, Yahweh. And which means, if you translate Yahweh, Yahweh translates to I am, or I will be. And so if we were to read it correctly, perhaps, it's God saying his name, I am, and he's saying it twice to really drive home a point, to particularly emphasize his nature, which he's about to reveal. I am, I will be, compassionate, gracious, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness. And remember, while God is revealing his nature of compassion and grace and faithfulness and love and forgiveness, this conversation is happening after the Israelites have already broken the first of the 10 commandments and created a golden statue to worship in God's place. And then God has had this conversation with Moses. He's like, Moses, I'm just going to work with you. I can trust you. I don't know about the others. And Moses intercedes for all of Israel and says, God, think about your name. And God's saying, these people, they're stiff-necked. They're they're hard-hearted. They want to go back to Egypt. They would actually rather be back in slavery than be my people faithful to me. But Moses says, God, think about your name. Think about your reputation. Think about what people will say about this Yahweh amongst the nations. And the question Moses is asking of God is, who will the Hebrew God be known as? Who will Yahweh be known as? And God responds with this description. This is who Yahweh will be known as. Yahweh, I am, will be known as compassionate, gracious, slow to anger, full of love and faithfulness, forgiving rebellion, and maintaining justice. All right, verse 33, verse 18 says, then Moses said, now show me your glory. And the Lord said, I will call all my goodness to pass in front of you, and I will proclaim my name, the Lord, in your presence. Well, Israel's rebellion is part of the reason God reveals his name to Moses, almost as like a complete counterpoint to the faithlessness of Israel. God is showing himself completely faithful. The other part of God revealing his name and his nature comes from Moses' desire to really know God, Moses' desire for intimacy. Exodus 33 verse 18, now show me your glory. There's a desire for connection, a desire for intimacy. Moses is having a conversation with God, and if you read it in verse 33, chapter 33, it's almost like out of nowhere, he just kind of yells out, show me your glory. And I wonder if there is a hint of the prophetic identity in Moses that we can have as well. That maybe a part of our prophetic identity is the desire to see, the desire to encounter, the desire to be close to and know the heart of the prophetic God. And I wonder if we as a people can go on this journey together and encourage each other. Can we be a people who cry out for God to show us his glory as well? You know, casual acquaintance with God is better than nothing, absolutely. If there's a choice between casual acquaintance with God and nothing, I'll take casual acquaintance with God. And that says more about who God is than it says about who we are. But casual acquaintance with God is better than nothing, but it can be ineffectual in many ways, absolutely. There is so much more for God to reveal about himself to those who desire it. We've got casual acquaintance on one hand, and we've got those who are hungry, those who desire, those who want intimacy. He's looking for those who want to be with him, to encounter him intimately. And God responds to desire. And I think this makes sense. You know, if you want to hang out with me, I'll hang out with you. I'll hang out with people. And maybe if you just want to look at your phone while we're hanging out, then that's great. But I really want to connect and become friends with and share my life with those who want to be with me. That when you're spending time with me, you're not always on your phone. There's time for us to actually connect. Exodus 34 verse 7. Maintaining love to thousands and forgiving wickedness, rebellion, and sin. Yet he does not leave the guilty unpunished. You know, it's incredible that in God's prophetic name, he emphasizes his forgiveness of wickedness, sin, and rebellion right after the Israelites have displayed wickedness, sin, and rebellion so blatantly. But enclosed in this revelation is also God's love for those being exploited. God will bring justice, and that's what justice is. Justice is showing love for those who have been victims. Justice to those in our current generation and those of future generations as well. That's what God's about. I'm going to take care of justice now. I'm going to take care of justice in the future because I love victims and I hate exploitation. Anyone who has ever felt that perpetrators keep getting away with it, maybe you felt like you've been ripped off somehow and you can't get justice, and you go, who's going to bring me justice? I hope that you can find comfort in the truth, according to the Bible, according to the story of God, that perpetrators will ultimately not escape justice. They will not ultimately get away with things. God sees those being mistreated and he cares deeply. Sometimes, and that's a comforting thought for those who've been victims. But one thing I hope that we all remember, and I've seen this in my own life, sometimes the victims go on to become the perpetrators. So there's actually a tension here. We can always cry out, God, give me justice, when actually maybe someone's crying out for justice on us because we're the victims, yes, but we've also made victims ourselves. There's a real tension. I think in the story of God, this tension between being a victim and a perpetrator at the same time, I think that Jesus bridges this tension between compassion and judgment. Jesus, according to the story of God, took judgment upon himself and broke the power of rebellion and brokenness. In my life, I've been both a victim and a perpetrator. And my hope that I live by, that my life is founded on, is that in Jesus, my story is that in Jesus, that Jesus has defeated me, has defeated my rebellion. Not only has he defeated me in my rebellion, he's forgiven me in my rebellion. And in my brokenness, he's made me whole. As a perpetrator, in my rebellion, he's forgiven me. In my victimhood, in my brokenness, he's made me whole and cleansed me. In God's story, we see that he reveals his name to his people. In the story of God, God reveals his name to his people, Yahweh. And in sharing his name, he shares his nature. Compassionate, gracious, slow to anger, full of love and faithfulness, forgiving rebellion and maintaining justice. In Moses' story, we see that God reveals his name to those who want to get close to him. Moses desired to see God's glory, and he is the first to hear God's self-revelation of his prophetic character. And I think what happened to Moses can still happen for us. Moses was interceding for a people who had rebelled against God, and God showed Moses who he was. And I think that as we intercede for a people, Maybe it's our friends, our family, our neighbours, our workmates, people that we study with, our enemies. God still wants to show us his glory as he incorporates the story of us into the story of God. This partnership, as it was always meant to be, between humans and God. But that's just what I think. I wonder what you think, and here are some questions that might provoke some discussion. First group of questions: what stands out to you most in God's self-revelation, his self-description? That he's compassionate, that he's gracious, he's slow to anger, abounding in love, that he's faithful, that he's forgiving, that he's just. And why do you think God revealed to Moses his name when Moses wanted to see the glory of God? What does that say about how others show their glory? God, show me your glory. Well, let me tell you my name. What's going on there, do you think? If God reveals his nature as compassionate, gracious, slow to anger, and just, then what might that mean for how we confront injustice today? Is there a good way, a godly way, a prophetic way that follows the prophetic God? Or is any way just as good as another? And how might misunderstanding God's character distort the way we pursue justice? It's kind of related questions there. Finally, I alluded to this tension that exists in us as humans. We're victims and we cry out for justice, yet we're also perpetrators and someone else is crying out for justice against us. Now, how does Jesus help you make sense of the tension between forgiveness and justice? In what ways have you been both victim and perpetrator? And how has Jesus met you in that space? Anyway, I hope that provokes some discussion. Love to hear your feedback. And that's all from me. Thanks, guys.